Ukraine is accusing Russian forces of shelling an area in the south of the country, even as rescue efforts are underway to help people there escape flooding caused by the destruction of the Kakhovka dam earlier this week. Several people are reported to have been injured during airstrikes in the Kherson region. The shelling forced a suspension of some rescue work. Moscow, meanwhile, says its forces have fought off a Ukrainian offensive on another part of the front line. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy visited areas hit by the flooding. He criticized aid groups for not doing enough and called for a clear and quick global response to the flooding. As thousands are evacuated, some are choosing to remain.
President Volodymyr Zelenskyy meets with emergency services in the Ukrainian-controlled city of Kherson to assess the damage. 2 days after, the destruction of the dam on the Dnipro River sent torrents of water downstream, flooding towns and villages. The number of casualties remains unclear, but local hospitals are filling up. Zelenskyy thanked medics and talked with patients during his visit. How are the doctors, he asks. Good, reply the patients, who seem a little starstruck to see their president. When we listen to you, it's moral support no matter how hard it is, says this woman. There are fears the flooding could trigger a humanitarian crisis. Zelenskyy used his nightly address to criticize the slow pace of the international response to the disaster.
Each person who dies there is a verdict on the existing international system and international organizations that have forgotten how to save lives. If there is no international organization in the area of this disaster now, it means that it does not exist at all, and the system is broken. All the relevant appeals have been sent.
As evacuations are underway amidst relentless shelling, some are refusing to leave. Residents of Kherson have already endured Russian occupation before being liberated last November. Many have decided to stick out the floodwaters as well. They'll have to be careful. The Dnipro River forms a de facto front line between Russian and Ukrainian forces. Officials have warned that the surge of water has dislodged landmines planted on the river's banks, which are also floating in the water, along with other debris.
And we can now speak to Liam Collins. He's the director of the Modern War Institute and joins us from West Point, Virginia. Mr. Collins, welcome to DW. There has been continued shelling in Kherson's flooded areas, even as people are being evacuated. Is Russia attempting to seize this vulnerable moment to retake Kherson?
No, they don't have any. I mean, they can't take the Kherson because of the water that's in the way. Really, all it is serves little military purpose. It's just to impede the humanitarian efforts and the non-government agencies trying to conduct that humanitarian assistance to distract Ukraine from its war effort in fighting a war. So it serves no military purpose for Russia.
Mm-hmm. The dam breach has caused incredible damage, creating a catastrophe within a catastrophe, really. Is any side gaining an advantage from this situation militarily?
Yeah, I mean, first I'll say hydraulic warfare or the deliberate flooding during combat is nothing new, right? It goes back hundreds of years. William of Orange intentionally flooded low-lying areas to defend against Spanish invaders during the 80 Years' War. Chinese breached Yellow River levees in 1938 to slow down the Japanese advance. And in this war, right, if you remember the second day of the war, the Ukrainians blew up a dam on the Irpin River to help defend against the capital. What really sets this one apart is the order of magnitude, right? And many would say it far exceeds the bounds of military necessity prescribed by international humanitarian law. And so what it seems like, Russia has blown the dam to defend, right, to help it defend against this impending Ukrainian counterattack. So by making this already difficult obstacle insurmountable, Russia can then reposition tens of thousands of troops from south of Kherson to other areas where the Ukrainian counterattack laid. Plus, Ukraine has to conduct, a lot of effort for the humanitarian assistance. So really, this favors Russia significantly.
Let's talk about this counteroffensive that you mentioned, because there's once again reports of it having been launched now. Ukraine is denying it, and Russia is claiming it is beating it back. How much strategy is there already in this mixed messaging?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to determine when the counteroffensive has actually started, because they have a lot of shaping operations go in before you start the actual offensive, right? Up until this point, right, Ukraine may be conducting deception operations or probing to try to figure out where to conduct the attack, where the lines are weakest. And so I think that's what you're going to see. And Russia's going to claim they beat back anything, whether it's a probing attack or a deception operation. And if Ukraine is having struggles on its own, it's not going to admit that it started it. So there's going to be a lot of that until Ukraine actually we see them successfully breach some of these major obstacles and get a penetration, and then it's clear that they're into their counteroffensive.
We have been talking about the counteroffensive for months now. The fact that the West is speculating so much about it, is that putting undue pressure on the Ukrainian military?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Ukraine, they're a smaller military. They have to fight at a time and a place that's advantageous to them. They're not going to rush a counteroffensive, as Zelenskyy said, just for some artificial timetable or because they feel pressure, right? They're the smaller force, but much more capable. But they've been smart about choosing when and where they're going to fight and conduct their counteroffensive, just like they did in the fall. And so I think that's what you're going to see, right? They had to wait till they had all the supplies, all the arms, the ammunition that they needed, stage those things, and then conduct those shaping operations so that it's going to be successful. And then no doubt, right, what looks like the Russians blowing this dam, that throws a wrench into the entire plan.
As defense analyst Liam Collins with the Modern War Institute, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bring in Bradley Bowman. He's with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good to have you back on the day. Now, American media are quoting Ukrainian military personnel saying that the counteroffensive has started. Kyiv continues to deny these claims. Where do you believe things stand?
It's a good question. You know, there are two factors that kind of complicate the effort to make confident assertions here. One is Russian disinformation, which is a Kremlin specialty that they've been engaging in, obviously, fairly intensely since the February 24th massive reinvasion last year, and also a desire on Kyiv's part to not reveal its hand and make life easier for the Russians that they're trying to kick out of their country. So those are two complicating factors. But here are three metrics, if you will, that your viewers can kind of look at to discern what's going on. Looking at the size, the activity, and the composition of the Ukrainian forces. By size, I mean, are we talking about platoon and company elements maneuvering? Are we talking about battalion or brigade? Yeah, we're seeing a little bit of the latter. Some of these newly formed brigades we are seeing maneuvering, so that would kind of put a check on the side of the preamble or the initiation of the counteroffensive. Activity, are they probing? Or they're trying to exploit successes and break through weak points in the Russian lines. There's definitely a lot of probing going on. My sense is that Ukraine is holding a lot of its combat power and reserves to see where there is the weakness, and then we'll exploit it perhaps in the future. And then composition. Are we looking at combined arms that includes infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, infantry, artillery, engineers, those sorts of things? We are seeing that. We're seeing some of the best weapons provided, including the Leopard 2 tanks and the Bradley fighting vehicles employed. So when you put all that together in a pot and stir, I would say we're at least in the preamble of the major counteroffensive, if not in the first phase.
For weeks now, the West has been speculating about this much anticipated counteroffensive. I feel like these words always go together. It's the anticipated counteroffensive, the spring counteroffensive. Is this putting Ukraine in a position where it feels it has to sort of deliver to maintain Western support?
It's my sense that Kyiv absolutely feels that pressure. And, you know, it's not entirely unreasonable to expect results. After all, the United States and many of our European allies have committed tens of billions of dollars. And when you make that kind of commitment with finite resources, there's an expectation. But with that said, going on the offense in war is much harder than being on the defense. The Russians have had time to dig in. But we need to avoid the mistakes of last year, where we were simply counting tanks and armored personnel vehicles and predicting overconfidence for the Russians, because what the Ukrainians have is a morale and a motive to fight, because after all, they're defending their homes against an unprovoked and I would say immoral invasion. And a lot of the Russian fighters are, former prisoners who aren't quite sure why they're in Ukraine. You can overplay that on both sides, but I don't think we can underestimate some of the intangibles here, as many of us did in the past.
Mm-hmm. And you just mentioned it. For all this time of speculation, Russia has had just as much time to prepare and set up defensive positions. Given that, what's going to decide Ukraine's strategy here?
You know, I think as far as I can tell, and this is just informed conjecture, that a key objective of this counteroffensive will be to try to cut off the land bridge that Russia enjoys now from Russia proper to Crimea. And if you look at the early fighting that we're seeing in the last 24 hours in the Zaporizhia region, that would seem to confirm that at least a supporting effort, if not the main effort, will be in that region, again, trying to cut off that land bridge, which would make life much more difficult for the Russian invaders to the west and also in Crimea, depending what happens to that bridge going to Crimea from Russia.
Mm-hmm. Something we've been following very closely in the past days is the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. Now, aside from the humanitarian aspect, the catastrophe that we're seeing unfold there, basically within another catastrophe, what does the flooding mean for either side militarily?
You know, there's a lot of speculation about who's responsible. It's early days. You know, the Russians did it, the Ukrainians did it. Was it a natural, quote unquote, natural failure? You know, I can see arguments both ways. The truth is that the flooding has hurt both Ukrainian villages and Russian occupied villages, and it's actually damaged some of the Russian defensive fortifications, not to mention the climate disaster, the environmental disaster, and the humanitarian disaster. So it's definitely going to make the river more of an obstacle for Ukrainian forces to cross, but it's also forced some of the Russian defenders on the other side of the river to fall back. So it's changed things dramatically for both sides.
Bradley Bowman from the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Selina Kosakiewicz works for CARE International and joins us from Kherson. We're hearing reports of shelling in the region. How's that affecting the aid and evacuation effort?
Obviously, it has an impact. It is important to mention that the entire crisis for the past 2 days caused by flooding is coming just on top of the ongoing conflict and the very difficult situation in Kherson as it was before the flooding. It is important to say that any type of intensification of conflict only further jeopardizes the efforts, whether to provide immediate assistance or to ensure evacuation of persons that are affected by floods, but also further exacerbates their overall well-being.
Just how tricky is the rescue mission? Because you've not only got renewed fighting, the floods, but also floating landmines, dislodged ammunition.
Absolutely. It is important also to highlight that obviously the evacuations are happening in the area of direct contact and ongoing shellings, so it is already very difficult. In addition to that, obviously, the risk presented by the fact that the water may be carrying, and some reports already show the movement of different unexploded ordnance and different materials, actually exposes additionally people to danger. Not only the communities, but also those who are providing assistance. Obviously, it is estimated that the risks will be higher, in fact, as the water goes down and as the water level basically goes down. So far, immediate incidents haven't been reported, but the risk remains high.
How quickly was CARE International able to get people to the scene of this disaster that happened in the early hours of Tuesday? Because President Zelensky's criticism of aid groups has been that they've been too slow and the help has been too little.
Obviously, I assume that a lot of us did, that a lot of humanitarian organizations did envisage this as one of the scenarios, and the natural disaster or man-made natural disaster as something that could additionally complicate the situation. It is important to say that a lot of organizations activated immediately once the first reports came in of the damage made by the breach of the dam. And it is also important to say that, at least in Ukraine, a lot of efforts are employed to support the authorities that are providing assistance, but also local organizations and actors that are the first responders, that are really those present every day at the very area where the crisis is happening. And this applies to Ukraine as well. We, as care teams, we have been there Tuesday and Wednesday, and we are still present in Kherson, and we are supporting our partners. But it is even more important to say that our support also in terms of funding and enabling urgent funding to the local organizations, to those who are present on the ground that have responded from the minute one, is even more important. And I think that the efforts of many organizations go in that direction to ensure that the funding is made available, but also resources for the responders to take action.
Okay. Selina Kosakiewicz from Care International, thank you very much for being on DW.
Thank you very much for the invitation.